Poetry. Roman loved poetry and the influence of the classics on 20th century literature. He has translated books from ancient Greek, Latin, and French. He has also published a travel guide to South Africa with National Geographic, and is currently a contributing editor of the Poetry Quarterly Stanza. So let's give him a welcome.
Thank you very much, Whitaker. Okay. So let's get cracking. You can see this will show you that you're in the right venue. Yes, I published a translation of Homer's Iliad in 2012. Hi, Jill. And then this translation in 2017, both with this kind of South African flavour to them. Right, let me just give you a very brief, rapid overview of what I'm going to be dealing with in this course of lectures. Today, we're very much introductory, just kind of telling you what's in the Odyssey or reminding you if you've read it. Then lecture 2 will deal with a trip I took, which was a fantastic trip to Ithaca in 2017, the year I published the Odyssey translation. I'd never been to the island, and this was a fabulous experience for me. It'll be illustrated with slides, mainly slides that I took on that trip. Okay, and we'll be looking at the relationship between the Odyssey and the landscape of Ithaca. It's a disputed subject, but we'll deal with that later. There's your lecturer, hard at work researching Odysseus's arrival on Ithaca. Actually, Odysseus didn't swim ashore, but never mind. This is the bay where he's supposed to have landed. And then lecture 3 on Wednesday will be about translation. Here's the first major translation of the Odyssey into English by George Chapman. Probably won't have time to look at it in detail, but we'll touch on Chapman. We'll look in detail at some other translations. Then lectures 4 and 5 will deal with the Odyssey in art and literature. Absolutely enormous subject. One could lecture for a whole year on it. So it's going to be very, very selective. I'm just going to be able to touch on certain highlights. This is an ancient Greek so-called black figure vase painting showing a famous episode from book 9 of the Odyssey, where Odysseus escapes from the cave of the monstrous Cyclops, lashing himself under the stomach of the ram, the leader of the herd. In the 5th lecture, I'll look at James Joyce's Ulysses. We'll look at the Nausicaa episode, a part of which I put in the handout. You can have a look. Joyce does it in the kind of sugary girls' magazine style of the time. And Henri Matisse produced etchings for a special edition of Ulysses some years later. We'll look at some of those as well. This is his version of the Nausicaa episode. We'll learn about what that is in due course. Also, in lecture 5, one of my favorite artistic representations of the Odyssey is wonderful collages by the American artist operating mainly out of Harlem, Romer Bearden, produced this kind of black Odyssey series of collages which have their own special relationship to the Odyssey. We'll look at that in due course. Okay, what I mainly want to deal with today is just a kind of run through of the Odyssey, and then we'll look at 1 or 2 major aspects of the poem. But first, just a kind of running summary. The Odyssey, like the Iliad, was divided up in antiquity to 24 so-called books. A book, basically, before our paper book with pages, which came in around the time of Christ, so the beginning of the AD period. The book consisted of a papyrus roll, So an ancient book was however much would conveniently fit onto one of these long strips of papyrus. Sorry, you're hearing a bit of feedback. Yeah, is it irritating? I'll switch this off. Is it right? Okay, because I can shout fairly loudly. So the Odyssey falls quite conveniently into 6 4-book blocks. So we'll look at these 4-book blocks. The first, it's always struck people as odd that this poem called the Odyssey, so based on the hero Odysseus, actually doesn't introduce Odysseus at all until book 5. Well, it talks about him, but he doesn't appear in person until book 5 of the poem. And the first 4 books concentrate on the hero's son, Telemachus, and hence are often referred to as the Telemachy, these first 4 books. The poem, sorry, I just want to get to the right point. Yeah, the poem begins, unlike the Iliad, which begins on earth, the Odyssey begins with a divine council. So it begins in heaven, as it were, with this divine council of the gods. And that gives it its own peculiar flavour to the Odyssey, as we'll see towards the end of this lecture. At this council of the gods are talking about the problem. No, let me turn this off, it's irritating me. Just tell me if you can't. In this council, the gods are talking about, is it okay? About the problem that Odysseus, other heroes have returned home from after the war at Troy, but not Odysseus. And the goddess Athene pleads for her favourite. And so you get a kind of double action set up at this council. Zeus, the chief of the gods, says to Athene, you go down to Odysseus' home island of Ithaca, get his son going, send the son Telemachus out to search for news of his father. And that sets in train a kind of coming-of-age plot with the very young Telemachus getting out to explore the world for the first time. And on the other hand, Zeus tells the god Hermes, the messenger god in the Odyssey anyway, to go to the island of Calypso, the nymph who has kept Odysseus with her for the last 7 or so years. And she must tell Calypso to let Odysseus go. So you get this kind of double plot going. And the first 4 books focus on the first part of that plot, Telemachus' journey. So Athene comes to Ithaca, the island of Odysseus, and we learn about the anarchy on Ithaca. While the chief is away, suitors have taken over the place. They're wooing Odysseus' wife, but equally bad in terms of the morality of the epic. They're devouring his property, slaughtering his cattle and his sheep and his pigs, drinking all his wine, sort of wasting the substance of the homestead. Penelope, meanwhile, that's a famous story, she doesn't want to marry any of these suitors, and she says that she needs to weave a shroud for her father-in-law, Laertes, the father of Odysseus. So she starts weaving, and when she finishes the shroud, she will choose one of the suitors, but every night she unpicks what she's woven by day. So this is a kind of endless task. But then she's betrayed and discovered, so she has to finish the weaving. So it creates a sense of urgency now for Odysseus' return. Also in book 1 we learn about characters who are not present. There's a lot of talk about Odysseus. We learn how rascally the suitors are. They've got two special ringleaders, Antinous, we'll see his name in due course, and Eurymachus, quite distinct characters. Antinous is aggressive, cynical, violent. Eurymachus is very hypocritical, smooth, plausible character, but both equally wicked in terms of the plot. We also learn about Odysseus, and say even though he's not present, we hear a lot about his aged father who's withdrawn in grief to his own little homestead up in the hills. When I was on Ithaca, there was a place, Laertes Farm, farm of Odysseus' father. There's a lot of fantasy that goes on about Odysseus and the Odyssey on Ithaca. We also encounter Euryclea, the old faithful nurse of Odysseus, slave in the household, who's now the housekeeper and the nurse of his son Telemachus. Okay, then in books 2 and 3, Telemachus calls a council in book 2. The suitors think he's just a child, a boy. They laugh at his ideas of going in search of his father, ignore his pleas that they should leave his father's house. You get a sense of the kind of anarchy and weakness on Ithaca. This is the first council that's been called since Odysseus left. There are only old people there. All the young people have gone with Odysseus to Troy. They're helpless. They can't support him. But he manages, with Athena's help, to get hold of a ship, and he sets off first to Pylos at some distance, and this is his first voyage away from his native island. Goes first to Pylos, to old Nestor, who fought with his father at Troy and has now returned. Nestor can tell him something about the departures of the Achaeans. That's what Homer calls the Greeks, the Achaeans. He can tell Telemachus something about the disastrous or otherwise departures of the Achaeans, but he doesn't really have much news of Odysseus. Something that's focused on greatly right through the poem is the fate of Agamemnon. Agamemnon being, of course, the leader of the Achaeans against the Trojans. While he's at Troy, his cousin Aegisthus usurps his position, marries his wife Clytemnestra, and when Agamemnon returns, the two of them murder him. So thereafter his son Orestes, Agamemnon's son Orestes, returns and avenges his father's death. And this is held up as a kind of parallel to the plot of the Odyssey. Is this what's going to happen to Odysseus? Of course we know it's not, but it sets up a kind of narrative tension. Will Penelope be like Clytemnestra, Odysseus' wife? Will she plot against him as Clytemnestra did? So that story is told by Nestor. In book 4, then Telemachus goes on to Sparta, to Menelaus, the brother of Agamemnon, and his chastened wife Helen, who's now come back from Troy with her husband. We get these scenes of great, rather amusing scenes of domesticity with Helen now obediently back next to her husband. Sorry. Okay, I'll raise my voice again. So that's books 1 to 4. In book 4, Menelaus is able to give Telemachus news about Odysseus, news which Menelaus had heard from the old man of the sea. Menelaus recounts his own wanderings, which to some extent are parallel to those of Odysseus. And on those wanderings he encountered the old man of the sea who told him that Odysseus was with Calypso. So Telemachus, by the end of his journey, we and he get the sense of how distant Odysseus is, how hard his return is going to be, almost impossible, after nearly 20 years after the Trojan War. There's, I've just got an illustration for each of these blocks of books. There's Penelope at her loom, famous episode of the Odyssey. And there's his young son Telemachus trying to look like a warrior with 2 spears in hand, which is what the typical Homeric warrior always carries. It's red figure vase painting from the 5th century BC. This is the colour of the clay, and the background is painted in black glaze. Okay, books 5 to 8. We get Odysseus with Calypso, so we encounter him for the first time in person in book 5, and then with the semi-magical people, the Phaeacians, whom I'll say something about in a moment. You can see here is by an American painter. It's kind of like a 1920s marriage, a sort of wife stretching voluptuously in the background, Calypso and the husband rather bored, looking out. As the first time we encounter Odysseus in the Odyssey, he's weeping on the shore, looking out over the sea, longing for home and wife. So that's in book 5, and we'll come to another illustration in a moment. So this is where the second half of the Zeus's decision comes into effect. So Hermes now comes to Calypso's island, tells her that the gods have decreed that Odysseus must return. But, Homer always, the gods presumably being omnipotent could just whisk him home. That's not how things work in Homer. The heroes always have to kind of make the effort for themselves. So Odysseus has to build his own raft with materials. He's given tools by Calypso, fells trees, makes his own raft, and sets off. Then we get another major sort of plot element coming into play, where the god of the sea, Poseidon, is angry with Odysseus because Odysseus had blinded his son, the Cyclops, as I translate, the Cyclops, much earlier in the whole story. Poseidon sends a huge storm, wrecks Odysseus' raft, shatters it. He's left absolutely naked, swimming for shore. So this is a kind of absolute low point in his fortunes. He's left with nothing. He's naked, he's washed up on the island. He has to kind of build himself up from absolutely nothing. There's a wonderful simile at the end of book 5, a comparison, which compares this naked Odysseus sleeping under a bush to a spark of fire that a shepherd out in the wilderness preserves to be able to raise a fire again the next day. So we get the sense Odysseus too is going to blaze out again in due course.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Was he shipwrecked on the same island?
No, he's shipwrecked on Phaeacia. They say he's travelled some way over the ocean. Okay, so he wakes up and he finds himself in Phaeacia, among this sort of semi-magical people. The Phaeacians, pretty much like human beings, but the kind of fairy tale aspects to their island. It's a kind of halfway stage between the realm of the gods, Calypso's island, and the very human world of Ithaca. So it provides a sort of halfway stage between the sort of purely divine and the very human. So they have magical aspects about them, orchards that bloom all year round, kind of gold automatons that guard the palace, dogs made of gold, and so on. Otherwise, pretty much like human. Odysseus is found by, here's Athene, as a kind of protecting presence, the goddess. This is Nausicaa, the daughter of the chief of the Phaeacians, Alcinous. Here's one of her handmaidens, maidservants running away. She stands firm. A naked Odysseus comes out from his bush, holding a branch in front of himself. Not a very effective one in this image, and there's this immediate mutual admiration. It's kind of, it's like the sort of fairy tale story pattern of the princess who finds a stranger and he turns out to be a prince. But of course Odysseus can't marry Nausicaa, even though she admires him and her father says this is the kind of man he would like for his for his son-in-law. Okay, so Odysseus stays with the Phaeacians, he's royally entertained by them, but his identity is concealed. And this is a kind of preparation for the second half of the poem. where Odysseus' identity is concealed for most of the second half of the Odyssey. So he's just a stranger in Phaeacia for books 5, 6, 7, and 8. Detailed entertainment, he's given lavish gifts by the Phaeacians. So his kind of heroic status is built up again from this destitute, naked, shipwrecked person to the kind of hero who had left Troy laden with spoils, as we learn from other references in the poem. So he's given lavish gifts by the Phaeacians, and only at the end of Book 8 is he asked to say who he is. And yeah, that's enough of those books for now. Right, books 9 to 12 are one of the most famous parts of the Odyssey, the so-called wanderings of Odysseus. I'll come to these images in a moment. Important, this is where Odysseus has been asked his identity at the end of Book 8. The beginning of Book 9, he makes a famous declaration of his identity. I said I would give you a bit of Greek. The Odyssey begins, Andramoi enepen musta polutropon hosman apolla planthe troyes hieron toiethron apelta. That's what the Greek would sound like. Here I was reminded because Odysseus makes the declaration, Hey Odysseus Laertiades, and so on. So he says, I am Odysseus, the son of Laertes, my home is in Ithaca. And he goes on for 4 whole books to give a retrospective narrative. Odyssey has got quite a sophisticated structure. It's really the ancestor of the modern novel. So we get this retrospective narrative where Odysseus relates everything that happened to him between leaving Troy and arriving among the Phaeacians. So his background is filled in for us. And what a narrative it is. It's full of magical, monstrous beings, many famous episodes known to people who've never heard of the Odyssey even. Also important in these books is that we see a new kind of heroism developing in Odysseus. You know, the old Iliadic hero was essentially a kind of violent warrior. That was the kind of heroism held up as the ideal in the Iliad. Odysseus, in these wanderings, shows that he's kind of learning by trial and error a new kind of heroism where he has to endure, to be patient, to use intelligence. That's an almost kind of new thinking type of hero. He has to become a survivor. He can't just stand on his heroic pride and charge a monster like the Cyclops, otherwise he'd simply be killed. So he has to use qualities of intelligence, cunning, and patience. Some of the most famous episodes of the Wanderings, you've probably heard of them. The Lotus Eaters seems to be situated somewhere in North Africa. That's in Book 9. Odysseus' ship is driven off course. He sends out some of his men on land. They don't come back. And he finds them browsing on this wonderful kind of drug, the lotus, sweet, honey-sweet lotus. And when they eat it, they forget all about their home and their voyage and just want to stay there forever, browsing on the lotus. He has to drag them back and tie them up and chuck them on board the ship to detox. And they sail off. Very significant episode of the Odyssey in Book 9, major episode. The episode with this giant, one-eyed, flesh-eating being, the Cyclops, who, and as I say, it's significant because here Odysseus makes many mistakes. He is foolhardy in encountering this giant. His men tell him to get out, just take some of the sheep and goats and go. But no, he's inquisitive. He wants gifts. We'll see that important part of his character is always trying to get stuff. And so he puts his men at risk, many of them are killed, and he only escapes by his wits, he says his name is nobody, and so the Cyclops, when Odysseus blinds him, shouts out to his fellow Cyclops, nobody is blinding me, and they say, well, no one's bothering you, go to sleep, leave us alone. But Odysseus, as I say, puts his men in danger repeatedly. But he learns from that episode. And of all the episodes of the Wanderings, it's the one most often referred to elsewhere in the poem. He also meets giant Laestrigones, also man-eating giants that look like the Cyclops. That's where he loses all the rest of his fleet. He leaves Troy with a fleet of 12 ships, but by the time in Book 10 that he meets the Laestrigones, his fleet is reduced, and very conveniently for narrative purposes. You can feel the poet's getting tired of trying to keep track of all these ships. We've just got Odysseus and his ship and crew, so all the other 11 ships are destroyed. Another significant episode of Book 10 is that with Clipcare, Circe, kind of witch goddess, turns men into animals. We'll look at some artistic representations of her in late Victorian art. She's a favourite subject. Like any great hero, only the greatest heroes, Odysseus goes to the world of the dead, Book 11, to Hades. And importantly there, he talks to the prophet Tiresias, the famous prophet Tiresias, who tells him that he may just manage to get home, but he will find dangers in his home. This is the first time Odysseus has heard about that. We know about it, but this is the first time in the Odyssey Odysseus hears that there are problems back home. He might have guessed after 20 years. And also importantly, certainly for the subsequent history of Odysseus in myth and art and so on, Tiresias tells him that even after his return to Ithaca, if he does get there, he'll have to wander again. He'll have to go on another voyage to appease the god Poseidon, the god of the sea, who's angry with him and causing all these difficulties. In Book 12, the Sirens, another famous episode, Odysseus is warned that he'll meet the Sirens, these beautifully singing goddesses who lure men ships to the rocks to be wrecked, and the bones of sailors are scattered on the rocks. This is how they're normally shown in Greek art, either dressed or topless, like birds, feather birds. You can see this one's holding a lyre to indicate their musicality. And Odysseus, again using his intelligence, although he's told how to do it by Circe, so not so intelligent, he blocks the ears of his crew with wax, but he wants to hear the song of the sirens. Typically Odysseus wants knowledge. And so he has himself tied to the mast so he can hear the song of the sirens. He's told his men, even if he struggles to get free, they must tighten the ropes and not let him escape. Okay, so that's the first half of the Odyssey. I'll go quicker through the second half, which is, probably far less read than the first half of the poem. Anyway, Book 13, Odysseus is landed on Ithaca asleep by the Phaeacians, who give him an escort, leave him there, and he wakes up not knowing where he is. And you find in Book 13 a whole lot of characteristic themes and narrative devices, which are going to be important in the second half of the poem, are sounded already in this episode where Odysseus wakes up and he encounters the disguised Athena, and he lies to her, not recognizing that she's the goddess. So, disguise is very important. At the end of Book 13, Athene transforms Odysseus into a tattered, wrinkled old beggar. So he looks nothing like himself. He's old, wrinkled, grey-haired, dirty kind of knapsack over his back. Irony is used again and again in the second half of the poem, particularly irony about the whereabouts of Odysseus. And this is made possible by his disguise, because he seems to be a beggar, but people talk about him to his face. Odysseus is dead, he'll never come back. Don't think he'll be there. Poem does that kind of thing. Presumably his audience did too, this constant irony about Odysseus being talked to about himself. Testing. Odysseus' beggar's disguise enables him to test all he comes in contact with, to see where do they stand in relation to the supposedly absent chief himself. So are they loyal? Can he rely on them or not? Lying stories, repeated lying tales told by the beggar about himself. Often says he's from Crete. He's got a whole lot of elaborate stories about his history. Also very important, the fact that the hero has to rein himself in. Even when he hears in book 13 that he's on Ithaca, he restrains his natural joy because he doesn't want to give himself away to the stranger that he's talking to. So that kind of self-control that he's learned through the wanderings, he has to exercise repeatedly right through until he can reveal his true identity. What else? One other thing is the constant foreshadowing of the coming destruction of the suitors, which is what the plot is leading up to. It's essentially a return and revenge plot, like endless westerns, the plot of the Odyssey. The hero is away at the war or wherever, comes back, finds usurpers on his corral, his ranch, kills them all, re-establishes himself at his homestead. Odyssey is the great-great-great-grandparent of those sorts of plots. Okay, in book 14, if we look at the illustration, again a red figure, vase painting. This is Odysseus here, typically shown in ancient art. You can pick him out quite easily. It's one of the few that wears this kind of conical, cone-shaped cap, which is a sort of traveller's cap. That and a beard, it's an adult bearded character with that kind of cap. It's almost certainly Odysseus. And here are the swineherd Eumaeus, carrying baskets on a pole over his shoulder. Very sympathetic character. I mean, he's a poor man himself, a slave, but he is notably sympathetic towards the stranger. I mean, Odysseus appears to him just a dirty old beggar to whom he owes nothing, but he receives him hospitably. We'll come back at the end of the lecture to this hospitality theme, which is important in the Odyssey. Okay, so Odysseus very soon learns that Eumaeus is loyal to him, doesn't reveal his identity to him. Book 14 continues in Eumaeus' hut. Book 15, we go back to Telemachus. We'd left Telemachus in Sparta at the end of book 4 with Menelaus. Now the plot goes back to him. He's told by the goddess Athene to return to Ithaca. She warns him that the suitors have sent out a ship into the channel. Ithaca will look at the geographical setting of that tomorrow. That the suitors are out in the channel next to Ithaca to intercept him and murder him on his return home. So Athene tells him how to get back to Ithaca and avoid the suitors' ambush. He does that in book 16. He comes to Eumaeus' hut. Athene briefly retransforms Odysseus back to his original shape. He's reunited with his son. He knows that he has an ally he can rely on. Eumaeus still stays in the dark. But from here on, those kind of two plots, with Telemachus and Odysseus, that come together, and the plotting against the suitors now occupies the forefront of the narrative. Okay, book 17 to 20, Odysseus finally returns to his own home in book 17, still disguised as a beggar. And a famous moment of that return where he comes with Eumaeus. You can see there's Odysseus, there's Eumaeus, you can see an old master etching, and here's his home. Not described as anything like that grand. There's a pile of dung outside the doorway in the Odyssey. That's why I never use the word palace in my translation. I'll talk about that on Wednesday. It's a home, anyway. And he's the only living creature that spontaneously recognizes Odysseus on his return is his ancient dog, rather implausibly more than 20 years old now, who recognizes his master under the beggar's disguise, feebly wags his tail and tries to come to Odysseus and then dies. The moment his master returns. Sad moment in the poem. No one cares about the slaughter of 100 suitors, but everyone is moved by the death of the dog Argos. And Odysseus has to brush away a tear. This is one of the numerous moments where he has to repress his natural feeling. The text says he brushed away a tear, but kept on going into his home. Important in these books, books 17 to 20, Odysseus now encounters the suitors for the first time, and we get a repeated series of assaults on him in his beggar's disguise. So he's assaulted first by Antinous, the leader of the suitors, appropriately in narrative terms, then by the second in command, Eurymachus, and finally by an insignificant suitor later on. So we get this kind of direct personal motive for his revenge, not only the devouring of his substance and wooing of his wife and sleeping with his maidservants, slave women, but direct assaults on his own person. We also get a kind of arc of Penelope and the stranger kind of growing close. It's almost like Penelope kind of unconsciously senses who he is. In book 19, of which this is an illustration, Odysseus at last is left alone with his wife. It takes some setting up this interview, but here he is still as beggar. There's Penelope, there's Euryclea in the background. This is the moment where she is about to wash the beggar's feet. She's got a basin in her hand there, and she recognizes a scar on Odysseus' leg, and suddenly realizes this beggar is Odysseus. He has to grab her by the throat and threaten her to keep quiet, not reveal his identity. But Penelope still doesn't know who he is. But she finds the stranger very sympathetic. She begins to confide in him. By the end of book 19, she's telling him one of her dreams. And then she says she's going to have to marry, the crisis has come. But she wants to set up a contest that Odysseus used to perform of stringing his mighty bow, which almost nobody could do because it was so hard to bend, and then shooting an arrow through a whole series of axes set up in the floor of his main hall. And Odysseus says, yes, do that. Set up this contest. Because, of course, he is going to compete himself and outdo his suitors. So the contest of the bow is set up. Then, in book 21 to 24, you get the point that the whole plot has been building up to, the vengeance and the reuniting of husband and wife. Here's Odysseus. Here's pathetic-looking little bow. I mean, the bow described in Odyssey is impossible. The suitors try to bend it, they can't. They heat it, they rub it with fat, they try to soften it, but they can't string it, they can't bend it. So it's imagined as some kind of mighty thing. And here he is. This female figure shouldn't be here because all the women are shut away while the fight goes on in the hall. And here's Odysseus on the other side of this vase. There are the suitors being shot down. As the Odyssey text says, using the tables as shields. So that's in book 22. We get an episode at the end of book 22 Pintoricchio that greatly upsets certainly 20th century readers. Not so much the killing of the suitors, but that the disloyal maidservants who've slept with the suitors are hanged by Telemachus on Odysseus' orders. We'll see what writers like Margaret Atwood make of that in the last lecture. Okay, in book 23, finally, Odysseus, Penelope comes down and she's naturally reluctant to recognize Odysseus. So it takes some time. She tests him, he's tested everyone else. She tests him by telling him a secret that only the two of them know about how their bed was made around a living tree. She says the bed must be moved. And he flares up and says, who's moving this bed built around a living tree? And finally she falls into his arms. She recognizes that he knows a secret known only to the two of them. Book 24 is a kind of wrapping up. There's a kind of perfunctory battle against some of the suitors' relatives, but a blood feud is avoided by the gods' intervention. Odysseus identifies himself to his father, Laertes, so father and son are reunited. And you get this moment where Laertes, the grandfather, Odysseus, the father, Telemachus, the grandson, fight together shoulder to shoulder against the suitor's relative. It's a very brief battle, but nevertheless, it's meant to be a sort of proud, patriarchal moment of all the male line asserting their warrior identity together. Okay, so that's the Odyssey. Just a couple of things about it. The Odyssey was only an exciting adventure story. I don't think that would, it was just an exciting narrative. I don't think that would explain the hold that it's had on people's imagination for nearly 3,000 years now. It's quite a feat for a narrative still to be read and to be readable after so long. And there are reasons for that, I think. Just to quickly look at some of those. The poem uses narrative to reflect on the human condition in a number of important ways. For one, the Odyssey is in a sense a theodicy, as we'll see in a moment. That is, it justifies the ways of gods to men. Again, the two main heroes of the epic, Odysseus and Penelope, are in many ways representative human characters, at least for their epoch. Certainly a kind of representative married couple. And another reason I think why the Odyssey is always interesting is that it reflects deeply on the nature of human society. What sort of thing is human society? How should people behave or not behave towards one another? In what follows, the translation text that I've got from my own translation, this is the sort of theodicy theme being set up right at the beginning. This is the council of the gods. First to speak was the father of gods and men, that is Zeus. His spirit remembered noble Aegisthus, slain by famed Orestes, Agamemnon's son. Remembering him, he spoke. No, how these mortals blame the gods. They say all evil comes from us, but they, by their own blind folly, suffer beyond fate. And then he cites the example of Aegisthus and Agamemnon. Importantly, says at the end of that little paragraph, yet we had warned him. So the gods here kind of take an interest in human morality. Very different from the Iliad, where the gods really hardly could care less. They're interested in their own, as long as they get sacrificed, they're happy, as long as their own prerogatives are observed. But the Odyssey has this kind of new idea, this sort of interest in how humans behave towards each other. But I guess the spurned the friendly warning as now has paid the price. And Athene says, yes, that's what should happen. That man met the death that he deserved, as all should die, commit the crimes he did, but I'm thinking about Odysseus. On it goes. Then, at the very end of the poem, at the end of book 22, Euryclea comes into the hall after the suitors have been killed. She wants to shout out with joy. Keen though Euryclea was, Odysseus held her back and said, addressing her with winged words, "Don't ululate, rejoice within your heart. It is unholy to boast or slain men." Very different from the Odyssey. The heroes boast over their people they've killed all the time in the Iliad. Sorry, that's how the Iliad. All heroes boast all the time in that situation. And, you know, to the extent that the Odyssey has got anything as crude as immoral, this would more or less be it in Odysseus' words here. The gods' fate and their wicked deeds destroyed them, for they failed to honour any man on earth, either good or bad, whoever came their way. So their crimes have brought a shameful death on them. Okay, so that's the sort of theodicy. Odysseus as a representative human character. Odysseus is an extraordinarily varied character in the Odyssey. He can build a raft, he's a warrior and so on. He's a trickster, he's the grandson of Autolycus, his mother's father, who was himself favoured by Hermes, who was also a trickster god. So he's got a kind of trickster lineage. He's sometimes devious, he certainly can fluently tell lies, he's keen for material gain. Also very unusually among Homeric heroes who tend to be specialists, a great killing machine like Achilles in the Iliad, or kind of military leader like Agamemnon. Odysseus is a kind of all-rounder. He's not the best warrior, but he's a very good warrior. He's not the greatest orator, but he's up there among the best. He's a good chief over his people, as we hear from people like Eumaeus and others. So he has many abilities. He's devoted to his wife and family, despite his occasional dalliance with goddesses. After all, he can resist a goddess. And as I've said, he's a new type of hero. He's wily, quick-witted, cunning, adaptable, trusting in the gods, patient, enduring, and above all, a survivor. So, you know, other heroes win glory by dying young in a blaze of glory on the battlefield. Odysseus wins glory by surviving, by returning to home and family. And we can see these characteristics in his stock epithets, which are repeated: cunning Odysseus, wily Odysseus, patient, enduring Odysseus is applied to him again and again in the poem. Now, just one or two sort of key passages. Odysseus talking with the nymph Calypso. We see his kind of humanity. Calypso just can't understand. Why would he want to leave a goddess? She can make him immortal. He can live the life of pleasure for eternity. And he sort of tactfully answers her and says, "Goddess, don't be angry. I know all too well myself. Wise Penelope is no rival for you in beauty, looks, or stature, since she is mortal. You, ageless and immortal. But still, and yet, I yearn, wishing all this time to see my homecoming day and to return." So he's still got a very human kind of urge to be back in his familiar mortal surrounding. Then a famous passage in book 13 where Odysseus encounters Athene disguised as a young shepherd, and finally he lies to her and she's amused, and she reveals who she really is and strokes his head and says to him, "Even a god would have to be a clever crook to beat you at your devious, cunning game, you crafty skinner and rascal. No tricks too much for you. Even at home we won't stop those tall stories and those deceptions that you love so much." And a little bit later in that speech she says, "Your mind within has always been the same, so I can never leave you in misfortune. because you're human, sensible and shrewd. So he's a kind of, a very human character. If we turn to Penelope, Odysseus is longing for wife and home as matched by Penelope's longing for her husband. Homeric epic, of course, reflects a deeply patriarchal society, almost completely dominated by men. I think it's remarkable for a poet of the 8th century BC. Homer never shows any of the kind of crude misogyny that you quite often find in ancient Greek poetry and in ancient literature generally. I think it's quite remarkable within such a society how much space the poet gives to Penelope within the narrative, and striking with what sympathy and insight he treats her situation. So, Penelope is given status. She's identified by a patronymic, her father's name. Normally that's the prerogative only of male heroes, like Odysseus, the son of Laertes, Agamemnon, the son of Atreus, Achilles, the son of Peleus, and so on. But she's constantly called Icarios' daughter. She's acknowledged by everyone as highly intelligent and cunning, as in her trick of the weaving. So she's Odysseus' equal in that respect. She's morally courageous in confronting the suitors very directly in the second half of the poem with their crimes and their shameful behavior. She's devoted to her husband and family, of course, a really important thing for patriarchal and Greek audience. She's beautiful, attractive to men, as we see from the suitors constantly wishing they could sleep with her. And on occasion, she can be sly and devious and inquisitive. There's a famous episode in Book 18 where she appears in all her beauty in front of the suitors, inspired by Athene, and elicits gifts from them, necklaces and perfumes and clothing. And Odysseus is watching this all, and he's delighted in his beggar's disguise that she's as cunning and inquisitive as he is. Okay, I think I'll have to leave that simply for lack of time, unfortunately. Sorry to shortchange female character there. I'd just like to say one final thing about response to the stranger and guest in the Odyssey. It's a very important theme, runs right through the poem from beginning to end. What's at stake here is something called xenia in Homeric Greek, xenia in Latin, which means, rather clumsily translated as guest friendship. It's based on the word xenos, which means all of those three things. If I arrive at your house, I'm a xenos, a stranger and a potential guest. The host is also, so you're xenos towards each other. The host is xenos as well. So it means stranger, and it means host, and it means guest. And it's got a very elaborate and proper pattern to it, which is repeated many times in the poem. So we know what the ideal should be, and so we can see very easily when it's violated. So the host must greet the guest. The guest is under the protection of Zeus, who's god of guests and strangers. The guest will be given food and drink, not asked anything at this stage. In a very full, elaborate version, the guest may also be given a bath, clothed in fine clothing. That's only the most elaborate hospitality. And a very important part of the etiquette, only after eating should the guest be questioned about the guest's name, family, place of origin. You get the standard phrase, who are you, where do you come from, who are your people? And on departure, the guest will be given guest gifts. The richer the host, the more elaborate these gifts. And that creates reciprocal obligations. So if I'm your guest, your xenos, and later you who were my host, come to me, you must receive hospitality, it's a matter of honor, of the same standard as you provided before. So the same kind of value of gifts, the same lavish hospitality.